Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of the Natalie in Renaissance podcast. I've talked about outcome-based goals, process-based goals, creativity, being in construction mode, and so I wanted to follow up on those topics in this episode about encouraging creativity, and I'm going to target this more with performing artists, although it does apply in a broader space for educators, facilitators, and beyond. But when I think of creativity, someone said to me that creativity is the highest form of intelligence, where it is taking all of your experience, all of your skill, and elevating your thinking by trying something new or a different approach, or transferring those things to a new medium or a new path. And so as an artist, as a teacher, as a musician, creativity is sort of an expectation of being an artist, being a risk taker, being playful, having these opinions, doing them. I think a lot of people think that you either have it or you don't. And I think that's very unfair to say. Being creative, while it can be very fun, it is also a very vulnerable place to be. And if you don't feel supported or prepared or in a calm environment or working with a positive person, it almost feels that that creative place is locked away. Like you can't access it as an artist because you're focused on other things, especially mentally. And so one of the things that I have read about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically, it's a psychological model of human motivation and of human support. And basically, there are 4 or 5 different levels of this. But the first and second level have to do with an individual's basic needs, such as food, rest, shelter, etc. And then the third level, after our basic needs, is our psychological needs, such as safety, protection, etc. And then after the psychological needs level is the 4th level, which has to do with self-fulfillment, creative actualization, being artistic, and things like that. And so this hierarchy of needs, it really stuck out to me because a lot of what I do has to do with that highest level, the 4th, the 5th level, about self-fulfillment, your identity, creativity, art. But for an individual to be able to access those higher levels, they first need their 3rd level of psychological needs to be satisfied, to feel safe, to feel supported, to feel understood. And it's only when those things are fulfilled that an individual can get to those higher levels of creativity, but support, safety, and protection does have to be prioritized. And so as teachers, facilitators, when we want our students to be able to achieve these higher levels in their work, we need to nurture those things. We need to welcome and invite those things by creating a warm, positive, and calm learning environment where the students feel safe and therefore these things can be developed. Learning is such a very vulnerable and fragile position to be in psychologically, and there's so many different things that can happen negatively, such as cognitive overwhelm, visual flooding, overstimulation, psychological shutdown, emotional triggers. I mean, I could just go on and on. In working with learning, where we're trying to create something new in students to develop something, we're working with people's pain points. We're working with inadequacies, and this is where we are interacting with an individual's self-concept, right? And you could encounter limiting beliefs, you could encounter just these pain points, and how we approach them and how we choose to frame things and work with students is everything. And I think the very first step is to let the student or client know that you're there to support them. By respecting the learning process and respecting these beginning stages, you are really acknowledging their courage as an individual and their willingness to learn, to grow, and that is something to be celebrated. The second is just to acknowledge that in learning, again, the brain is hyper aware, and so these things can spike triggers, or the student can be overthinking. There's just so much to process all at once. And by calming the environment down and by maintaining a very calm presence, very calm emotional tone, and even in the way you speak to them or address them, by keeping things very non-emotional, and by that I mean nothing is emotionally charged in tone or in how you speak to them, in your movement, they're able to not be spiked into the fight, flight, or fawn responses. We're able to regulate those emotions so they don't get in the way of productive learning. And this space that the calm give us, and by just maintaining a positive and neutral environment, it gives space and room for the individual to adjust. I think, in learning, when you might be nervous about trying something new, about how you're going to look, there's just all these thoughts and fears and doubts that can creep in. And by really just making the student comfortable, we can really minimize the periphery of the mind, and they can adjust to you, they can adjust to the space. And so by not diving in too quickly into their performance, by not diving in too quickly to what they do or don't know, we sort of take the pressure away from them, and so we can approach it from a very balanced way. The next thing is to really start developing a growth mindset and growth mindset framing around learning and what you're working with right away. And so my students, we start very quickly with things like improvisation, starting in very, very low pressure, low risk areas, and then building out from there. We do some songwriting when they learn their basic letters, or when they learn something like a 5-finger pattern or a mini scale. We start doing songwriting where, again, in these little increments, I'm giving them a little bit more responsibility. I'm giving them a little bit more say and room to be independent. And so we're already discussing flexibility, adaptability, while also being playful, having fun in these small doses, before later on in intermediate pieces when I'm asking them to play with dynamics or do this or that. That aspect of play, of creativity, is already being built in from day one, where we're already working from a constructivist aspect of breaking things down, looking for patterns, looking at what we do know, what we don't know, and not feeling bad for what we don't know, because even I, as their teacher, I don't know everything, but I am very confident in my ability to learn. And so sharing my thought process with my students and letting them in about, the way I think, and just sharing suggestions. I do that a lot, in that I'll provide a suggestion, but I necessarily won't tell them what to do. This helps them to create their own context for learning and to help them build out their own process. But it also just shares that I too am still a continuing student, and I'm still in touch with the process of being a learner, which I think goes a very long way. Another thing that I think plays a big role is the actual physical space in which you work with your clients. I am a very visual processor, and if I'm in a very cluttered or visually complex environment, a lot of my mind unintentionally goes to the environment, and it affects me very much. And so the space in which I work has a lot of neutral tones, very minimalist in aspect, just because I don't want any of my students who are also like me, where very strong visual processing, where it affects the mind. I don't want that to be a trigger, and for them to be unfocused even before we've even sat at the instrument to do something productive, when they can't be productive because their mind is elsewhere occupied. So I think it's very important to talk about these contexts of environments, the context of these teacher and learner relationships, because if a learner's system is under duress or is distracted in any way, and it could be, life happens and they're emotionally upset, that's going to affect the learning. if they're hungry and they haven't eaten anything, that's very much going to affect the learning. And so just being aware of that the psychological needs, they come before all of these creative ones in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and honoring those first and being aware of them really, really helps us to be able to get to that fourth level, at least when it comes to creative work, that as a creative artist, I'm trying to help my students, to guide them and to help them achieve the goals or creative work that they want to do. It's my hope that in sharing some of these ideas to other teachers, we can really not only monitor the strategies that we have for teaching content and ways of engagement at the instrument, but also to be very aware and cognizant that, as I've said, the lesson, the learning experience starts from the minute students walk in the door. And just understanding the power of thought, the power of what we say to others, especially our clients, students, and how those things will loop in the students' minds. We need to be very, very cognizant of what we say to them and how we say it. And also, when we do encounter these moments of conflict, like psychological shutdown, like a mistake, like emotional overwhelm, how do we handle that? Are we handling it in a very calm and positive way? Or is that something where we just react to what happened? Or we immediately say something not very positive? That can be very difficult to do, especially if your own personal training has involved any of that, which I think anyone who has been in a high performing, high pressure situation, I think all of us have a story or two about having a learning experience that was very emotionally charged or was very negative or non-productive. And I think when we are using Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we see that creativity and risk-taking and play, it lies on the other side of feeling safe, of feeling protected, of feeling a layer of trust. And so as teachers, we need to be able to build those frameworks and work within those frameworks first. I think so many teachers are focused on the what, but they're not really focused on the why or even the how. And by balancing and coming to a more holistic approach and incorporating that into an elevated teaching philosophy, all of these things will more naturally happen, because by embracing the process, by respecting and supporting the learner, and actually in practice supporting them verbally, helping them to construct these self-supporting mental models, and by guiding them through the scary things and by making them friendly, the learning and the enjoyment is inevitable. Thank you for listening today. I hope this episode was enlightening for you. Please like and leave a review. Follow me on Instagram at NatalieinRenaissance. We'll see you next week.